Today, we're going to be beating Super Bonk. Now brace yourselves, things are about to get weird. What the hell is that? What the hell? Hang on guys, I gotta deal with this. I feel like a lot of you watching this are going to be wondering, what is Super Bonk? Who is Bonk? Is he just another generic mascot from a platformer game? But then there are going to be a few of you who know, and are pretty excited for this one. Now this handsome little chrome dome over here is Bonk, and he's actually the mascot of a console. Now he's no Mario, Sonic or Crash Bandicoot, so I don't think he caught on in the cultural zeitgeist the same way the big three did. But if you ask me, I think he might just be cooler than those three put together. Bonk was the mascot for the PC Engine, or TurboGrafx-16 for all you Americans watching. It wouldn't surprise me if there are a few of you out there asking, what the hell is a PC Engine or a TurboGrafx-16? What a dumb name, never heard of it. Well, to be fair, if you're not from Japan, that is somewhat reasonable. The PC Engine sold incredibly well, and it was a direct competitor to Nintendo's Famicom, being released in 1987 in Japan, and being marketed as the first 16-bit console, which is kinda true, and kinda not. You see, while it does have a 16-bit graphics processor, it was still only running an 8-bit CPU. I won't really bother you with all the technical jargon, considering this is a video about Super Nintendo games, but just know it's not quite 16-bit. Back to my original point, if you weren't living in Japan in the late 80s, there was far less chance of you running into this console. Due to some major delays, it wasn't released in the US until 2 years later in 1989 under the name TurboGrafx-16, and due to the delay and poor marketing, it was a massive commercial failure. Don't even get me started on the poor PAL territories. The Japanese PC engines were rebranded and released in the UK and France for a very brief time during 1988, but the planned official PAL release, scheduled for 1990, which was just going to be called TurboGrafx, without the 16, that was dropped from production, so most of Europe and us poor Aussies never even got a taste of that sweet bonky goodness or any other TurboGrafx or PC Engine games. At least not for quite a while. I do just want to say I've never actually played a PC Engine or TurboGrafx-16, whatever you want to call it, but I've become really fascinated by them lately. I'm definitely going to have to look into them some more and maybe even get my hands on one. Nope, never mind. Maybe I'll legally acquire some ROMs and emulate them. Legally, of course. Back to the man of the hour. Bonk is a man of many names. Well, 4. But still, that's more than most people. Obviously, there's Bonk. But in Japan, he went by PC Genjin, which is both the play on the console name of PC Engine, obviously, and the fact he's a caveman, as Genjin roughly translates to primitive man. Over in Europe, he went by the slightly less clever PC Kid. The reason for not using bonk in Europe is because it's actually a slang term for having sex. Well, at least it was in the late 80s, early 90s. Don't know how much it's used these days. Anyway, let me give you an example in my best English accent. Oh yeah, bruv, I met this fit bird last night, and we had some pints and went back to me place for a bonk. Man, UK slang is weird. Unlike our slang over here in Australia, which is totally normal. We meet a Sheila, and we go to the pub, and we go back home for a root. Sorry, I got a little bit sidetracked there. Fourth name Bonk goes by is PC Kid. When PC Kid was ported over to the Amiga, it didn't make much sense for his name to still be a reference to the PC Engine. So they went with BC Kid. You know, like the time period, because he's a caveman. Super Bonk is the 4th game in the series, following on from Bonk's Adventure, Bonk's Revenge, and Bonk's 3, Bonk's Big Adventure. That is a good name. The game was the first not to come out on the PC Engine, and it was released exclusively on the Super Nintendo. First coming out in Japan in July of 1994, and then, a few months later in November, the game came out in North America. And then, as usual, last but not least was the PAL territories, being released in April of 1995. At least, according to Giant Bomb. It took a lot of digging to find anywhere that listed a release month for the PAL version. Most sites just said 1995. Super Bonk was developed by a company called Red Entertainment, previously known as Red Company. They worked on mainly Japanese exclusive games from what I can see. One of the other games that was localized to the West was another Super Nintendo game, The Twisted Tales of Spike McFang, which is another one of those games on my list that I'm really looking forward to trying out, mainly just from the name alone. The publisher's name might seem a little more familiar to a lot of you, that being Hudson Soft, who are probably best known for their work on the Adventure Island, Bomberman, and Mario Party series, as well as just a ton of other games. So anyway, I think I've talked long enough without actually explaining what kind of game this is. It'll probably come as no surprise, but this game is a platformer. What? No way, a platformer on the Super Nintendo? Absolutely wild. Well, lucky for me, I love platformers. Super Bonk isn't a standard platformer, it's more of like an adventure exploration platformer. There are large interconnected levels which make up 6 stages. I'm honestly finding it a little tough to describe how the game's levels are laid out. Like, can you actually call them levels, or are they areas within a level? Do you call these 6 stages levels? I don't know, it's really confusing. Anyway, each stage has a number of areas, some of which are mandatory to complete and others are more like secret bonus areas. They're all interconnected and eventually they'll lead to the final stage boss. There is no overworld, no map or stage select, you just keep on adventuring, and if you die, you go back to the start of the level, or the area, or the stage, whatever you want to call them. The story is pretty bare bones, which is common for Super Nintendo games. The story is shown to us by a cutscene. It plays before the title screen, but of course, being me, I button mashed and completely missed the cutscene when I played it on stream. Whoops. So the scene starts out with Bonk walking along a prehistoric landscape, with a concerning number of active volcanoes in the background. He then stumbles upon this big-ass hunk of meat, clearly labelled Trap. Now, I gotta say, if I was in Bonk's position, I'd probably do the same thing that he does next. He runs up to that meat so he can have a feed. I mean, come on, it's free meat. Anyway, the big glass contraption falls down onto Bonk and traps him inside. Just then, out comes who else but King Drool III, the main antagonist of the Bonk series. He's Bonk's Bowser, I guess you could say. The glass contraption turns out to be some sort of time machine, I guess, and Bonk gets flung into a completely new timeline. So, off we go on an adventure to get Bonk back to his own timeline. As the title may suggest, Bonk's main form of attack is to bonk enemies, using his big old bald head. It feels pretty good to do. You can either jump on an enemy and push the attack button to start tilting your head towards them to ground bonk them, kind of like a more floaty ground pound, I guess? Or you can just do a standing bonk by pressing the attack button. The issue I found with the standing bonk is it's just much easier to miss and get hit by an enemy that's moving towards you, so 99% of the time I just do a jumping bonk instead since it's so much safer. The hitbox when attacking is quite large, so basically any section of your head works to hit an enemy, meaning you can even jump underneath flying enemies to bonk them in the butt. Don't say that in the UK, people might get the wrong impression. Bonk can also do a sort of flutter jump akin to Yoshi in Yoshi's Island. Except instead of fluttering his legs, he kind of spins around and around and around and around, slowing his descent and allowing you to jump further. This is done by mashing the attack button in the air. This is something I found myself doing quite often actually, as a way to be able to see where I was landing or, grab some extra collectibles in the air. Along with the flutter jump, there are a couple of other movement techniques to talk about, and they're a bit unique, a bit different. There are certain areas with horizontal poles such as trees in this jungle level that Bonk can grab onto with his teeth. Then he spins around and you can press the jump button to jump up to higher poles, bit of climbing. The other way you get to higher locations also involves Bonk's teeth. Most vertical walls can actually be scaled by mashing the B button when you're next to the wall. Bonk bites onto the wall and scales the wall with his teeth. Man, I hope this boy's got a good dentist, my lord. My favourite part of the game though is the power-up system. And honestly, it is a little confusing how it all works. I had absolutely no idea how any of this really worked in my playthrough. Only once I read the manual did I really get my head around it all. I think there's a lesson to be learned here. This is not the first time in this challenge that I have had this issue. I think I need to start reading the manuals before I start the game. Anyway, back to the power-ups. There are 2 types of power-ups in this game, and they do different things depending on the combination of the power-ups collected. There are chunks of meat which will make Bonk stronger, and there are coloured candies which change the size of Bonk. Red ones shrink you down, they make you tiny. Yellow will return you to normal size, and blue ones make you huge. Collecting a smaller piece of meat will turn Bonk into Fester Bonk. This gives you the power to petrify enemies with a furious glare, and it also gives you some sick Eugene Levy looking eyebrows.
Oh, that's fantastic! That is a great look for me!
If you collect a second small piece of meat, or you collect a large piece of meat, you'll transform into Kronk Bonk. Kronk Bonk is where things start to get a little weird, and also a great name. After transforming, you'll gain a brief period of invincibility, but more importantly, you get this weird looking butt-shaped head, or maybe it's meant to be a heart shape. I don't know. Instead of bonking with your head, now you attack with this long lizard tongue. Oh yeah, you do get a weird lizard body too. Probably should have mentioned that, but you can see you've got eyes. If you get hit while Kronk Bonk, you'll return back to Fester Bonk. And if you get hit as Fester Bonk, you'll turn back into regular Bonk. Did I say bonk enough? I don't know. Bonk. Anyways, that about covers the meat transformations, but that is only part of the process. There's also the candy transformations. And like I said earlier, there are different coloured candies that change the size of Bonk. Sometimes you'll need to be small Bonk to get through in a puzzle, or maybe large Bonk. Anyway, there are different puzzle reasons that you need to change size, but aside from that, the different size Bonks also have different abilities. Tiny Bonk's special move is the epitome of little man syndrome. This guy is so pissed off that he's short that he can shoot out a beam of pure rage. It's literally just a platform made out of the word rage. It bounces off walls and can be ridden on. It's so weird, man, I love this game. Huge Bonk, on the other hand, can use his special attack to... gross, why? He pops his head off and crushes enemies with his decapitated head. Man, I told you this game gets weird. Then there's Huge Fester Bonk, who turns into this freakish chicken beast and he can lay explosive eggs. Huge Kronk Bonk looks a little like a crazed Godzilla, and I just love him. Man, I want a picture of him on my bedside table, that's how much I love him.
That smile. That damn smile.
He also has the most OP special move. He can turn himself invisible, only leaving his eyes visible, so that you know where you're going. While invisible, you can't take any damage, but you can still attack enemies. It's super broken. Unfortunately for me, I didn't know about any of the special attacks during my playthrough, because, once again, I didn't read the manual. The only one I ever really used was the Rage platform, and that's because it was needed to beat some stages, so I button mashed until I figured it out randomly accidentally. These special attacks require smileys to be used. These little collectible smiley faces thrown throughout the level. I had no idea what these did, I thought they were just for points. Would have been nice to know during my playthrough. Read the manual. Most special moves only use a few smileys each time, except for Kronk Bonk's invisibility. That uses half of all of your smileys, so it needs to be used very sparingly. There is one transformation that I haven't touched on yet, and it's just as weird as the rest. Throughout the level, there are a number of things that can squish Bonk. As an example, in the prehistoric level, there's a dinosaur foot that moves up and down, and if you don't time it right as you're running by, Bonk will get squished. Anytime you get squished, you turn into a crab? I don't really know how that works. I don't know who came up with that, but there you go. Get squished, become crab. I love it. Crab Bonk can pinch enemies with his big meaty claws, and he can swim much faster than regular Bonk. To turn back into regular Bonk, you can either wait around for a minute, or you find yourself a candy. Either way, then you're back to regular Bonk. I could talk about every little thing in this game, but we'd be here all day. But I need to talk about one more feature of the game before we can go on to the recap. The mini-games. There are little flowers scattered throughout all the levels, and if Bonk runs into one of the flowers, he gets shot off to play a minigame, and this will happen a lot. There are way too many minigames throughout Bonk's adventure. After a while, it just becomes extremely tedious. I usually found myself completely avoiding the minigames altogether. There are a few different minigames, but it's still not enough to break up the tedium of how often you find yourself playing them. One of the most common games I found myself stumbling upon was Crockball. In this, you have a 65-second time limit and you need to bonk flowers onto your head and then throw them into the basket in the back of the giant moving crocodile. It sounds simple enough, kind of, but the throw is very slow, so if you miss, you'll end up having to wait around for a while for a flower to finish its arc, land, and then you can go over, pick it up and try again. I found that if I missed 2 or more throws, that was basically it. I wasn't going to complete the game in that time. Now there's no penalty for failure, the game just goes, nah, and it kicks you back out the level. Another one I came across a few times that was just super weird was this no-gravity space zone. You find yourself floating in a big maze in space and you just need to float around and try and find the exit. You can use your head flutter spin thing to kind of guide yourself around a little bit easier, which definitely does help, but it's still really hard to maneuver. I don't think I ever won this minigame once. I could just never find an exit. Maybe there is no exit. Maybe they're just screwing around with us. Anyway, I don't think it's worth me going over every single minigame. I think there's a lot of stuff in this game that's better discovered on your own, so why don't we get on with the playthrough? We start out by bursting headfirst out of a sign in Chinatown of all places. Things start to happen very quickly. I collected a giant candy within the first few seconds, got very excited, then half a second I ran into a tiny candy and got very sad. Then immediately grabbed a regular sized candy and was less sad, but still a little bit sad. Man, what a whirlwind of a first 10 seconds that is. Good start to the game. I hopped onto an orange flower and some meat came out. Makes sense, right? I grabbed the meat and transformed into Eugene Levy. Now, even more confused. Right after this point, there's a big wall with an arrow pointing straight up and nowhere else to go. I figured you must be able to climb in this game, right? So I jumped at the wall and kind of just clung on for a second before I slid back down. I tried again and I figured out how to climb this time. Pretty intuitive controls so far, I guess. Kind of. Seconds later, I stumbled upon a big hunk of meat and got quite the shock. What is that? That's terrifying. A few seconds later, I was climbing along the steel girders that were hanging out of the roof when I accidentally shrunk myself again. Everything was happening so fast and it was really hard to take it all in. Yeah, this game is wild. I don't know what the hell is going on half the time. I followed some arrows on the floor, grabbed a giant heart which fills your health back to full, and as I was falling, I landed on a bonus game flower. I like the game design there. Your eye is drawn to this big heart, so of course you jump for it, but as you fall down from collecting the heart, you can't help but fall onto this strange looking flower. You can't really tell at first if it's a good thing or a bad thing, until you're whisked away to a bonus level. First bonus level I experienced was one where you need to bonk this pump to inflate a weird looking floating dude with a propeller hat. Seems pretty straightforward. I saw a time limit and a pump connected to something, so I quickly started pumping. I managed to inflate him all the way with only 2 seconds to spare, and I scored myself a nice 10,000 points and 10 smileys. This meant nothing to me. I assume smileys were like coins in Mario. Get 100, get a life. But as I said earlier, that's not actually the case. I was taken back to where I was before the minigame and I quickly fell down this waterfall looking thing into a new area called Secret Tunnel.
Yeah, I forget the next couple lines, but then it goes... Secret Tunnel! Secret Tunnel!
To the left of me was another bonus flower, so I grabbed it. That's 2 bonus levels within 5 seconds. Already off to an interesting start. This time the goal was to throw flowers into the basket, like I described earlier in the video. I had no idea how to do this, but I was enjoying the music at least. After a few fumbles, I figured out how to throw flowers after getting them onto my head. I quickly finished the minigame with 10 seconds to spare, but I think that was just beginner's luck. More often than not, I failed this one later on in my playthrough. So as I was venturing through the secret tunnel, I came across some lava pits. Now, using my experience from other video games, I assume that lava means death. However, I still immediately jumped into the lava by mistake. But, to my surprise, Bonk can swim in lava for some reason. Straight after this, I got my first taste of the weird giant Godzilla Kronk Bonk. For all of 5 seconds anyway, before I accidentally shrunk down into Tiny Bonk. Aw man. I continued on until I came to the exit of the cave, but it was too big to fit through, and I was a little confused. And then I remembered, there's a tiny candy not far back, so I went back and shrunk myself down. I exited the secret tunnel, and this was my first taste of needing to be a certain size for some puzzle elements of the game. Outside of the secret tunnel, we were now in the Bad City. Now that's an ominous name. If you look closely, you may notice an interesting structure in the background. Are the developers implying that France is bad and French people are bad? I don't know. Right by the entrance, I found my first crystal heart, which is just a blue heart that adds 1 heart to your total health pool. I came across a very modern looking building while it was Giant Bonk, and I headbutted it, which destroyed a chunk of the building, showing its structure was actually made from giant prehistoric bones. Kinda weird, so of course I smashed the whole building. I walked a little further and I came across a tiny building marked Subway. I jumped over it and tried to continue on, but there was an invisible wall and an arrow pointing upwards. I tried going up, but I couldn't figure out how to. Then, accidentally, I walked into the subway building and realized it was just an entrance to the subway. So on to the next area we went. Somehow, this took us to an area called Troubled Tower. It was a very jungle-looking area. How weird. Did Bonk hop onto a train and ride down to this area, or was this just what the subway looks like in this strange timeline? I'm a little confused. There's this strange head-looking thing. As soon as you enter the area and you walk up to it, it opens up. So of course, I wandered in to see what happened. Turns out, it's actually a little rocket and it shot me up to the base of the Eiffel Tower. Sorry, Troubled Tower. I climbed up the tower, collected some stuff and avoided the enemies. Because you don't really get anything for taking out enemies except maybe points, which really, who cares about points in video games? At the top of the tower, I found some clouds and made my way to the next area. Trampo clouds. It took me a second to realize why it's called that. The clouds are super bouncy. Trampo, obviously, short for trampoline. Duh. So I bounced through the clouds for a minute before I reached the end of this area as well. There was a big road sign that just said exit and pointed down. So down I went. After a short fall, we were in Jurassic Bay, which looked to me like a giant bridge. I think it might have been like a representation of the Golden Gate Bridge. Before I got much of a chance to figure that out though, I missed a jump and I went plummeting down to the sea below. Now we're in an area called the Jurassic Sea, funny enough. We're accompanied by these glorious creatures. I mean, just damn, look at those lips. The confusion just kept coming as seconds later I was crushed by a random brick wall and turned into a crab for the first time. I got a little turned around while I was down in the ocean. I forgot I can latch onto walls with my teeth and climb, but once I remembered, I climbed back up the side of the bridge to continue on with my journey of confusion. At the end of the bridge there was a Ferris wheel. This area was called Jump to the Sky, and conveniently, instead of carriages for people to ride the Ferris wheel, they were just bouncy flowers. So I jumped on one and up we went into the sky again, this time landing on a huge plane. I mean, this plane must be so big. There were people driving tanks along the back of it. I fumbled my way around the plane until I fell into the cargo hole where I managed to snag myself a couple of upgrades to my health. Very handy. I was going to need these since the next area was the first boss fight of the game. The area of the boss fight was called Weak Head. A bit of a hint to the player, I guess. This handsome fella here is Moonbeak, and he's some sort of pterodactyl-like dinosaur thing who lives in a mechanical moon. This was a super easy boss fight. He basically flies from side to side, occasionally shooting out some energy rings that you need to dodge. You can use the spring flowers on either side of the screen to bounce up and bonk him in the head. It took me a whopping 40 seconds to finish this boss fight, probably about the same length of time it took me to actually just describe this boss fight. And there we have it, the end of the stage. This kind of surprised me. Stage 1 took me around 20 minutes, which seems long for a platformer. But when you realise there's only 6 stages, it does make a bit more sense. Stage 2 starts with Bonk falling out of the sky. I assume when Moonbeak exploded, he blew up the plane at the same time. How rude. This stage is called Escape from Jurassic Island, and immediately we're greeted by a humongous dinosaur foot stomping down, which of course I proceeded to walk under and get smushed into a crab, accidentally. I was really off my game during this stream. I was constantly running into enemies. Get it together. There's a lot of trees throughout this level, with weird, twisty, unnatural looking branches that you can climb and swing from to traverse around the level. You need to make sure to avoid the numerous dinosaur feet though. Before I eventually found my bearings, I jumped down this hole into Alligator Cave, a maze-like cave full of, you guessed it, alligators. I wandered around trying to follow the arrows for a bit and still feeling very lost, before I stumbled upon the exit to the area accidentally. This next area was called Black Hole. In here there were little holes in the floor, with either an X or an O above them. I picked a random one, stood on it, and I pushed the down button. This sucked me into a very thin, convoluted tunnel system that zoomed me all around the cave. I just kept going down random chutes until it shot me out the exit at the top of the cave eventually. Somehow, the exit of this cave leads to a giant bedroom. I think it's meant to be one of the dinosaurs' houses. This area was called Juicy Juice, a seemingly random name. I journeyed on through the house, climbing through keyholes, swinging from pot plants, and climbing over a very retro-looking CRT TV. Next to the TV was a light switch. I wasn't really aiming for it, but I just happened to jump onto the switch and it turned off all the lights in the house. A nice touch, I must say. I fumbled through the dark, and I ended up on a table with a glass of some sort of drink and a can of Juicy Juice. Ah, now I get it. This transitioned me to the next area, the Straw Smack. On the table, I was now obviously tiny, even more so than the last area. Now we could get up close and personal with a can of orange juice and the glass of mystery drink with an interesting looking bendy straw inside. Of course, I scaled the giant glass and went for a swim in the mystery brown liquid. I stood on top of the straw and it just looked like it had to be there for a reason, so I pushed the down button and whee! I got sucked through the straw right into the mouth of a dinosaur. Oh no! This is where the game starts to get a little more unhinged. Things really start to get weird now. This area is called the Inner Voyage. We're now journeying through the innards of a massive dinosaur, and for some reason, there's these weird flying devil monkey things. Or is it like a devil dinosaur? I'm not really sure. But yeah, he wasn't much trouble anyway. I struggled a little bit in this area. There's these water drops that fall from the ceiling and they damage you. And they're in these tight little spots that you need to wall climb and swing around on. Somehow, instead of climbing, I kept wall jumping and bouncing back into the water drops. Even now, over half an hour into my playthrough, I was still struggling to wrap my head around some of the controls. It did feel a little bit off to me. Maybe I just suck. Lucky for me, right before the exit there was a big heart to heal me to full health, since I was down to my last half a heart by this point. After climbing up for a while, we somehow entered the dinosaur's brain, in an area called Brain in Pain. Sounds like the poor fella had a headache, probably from these weird blue men running around in his brain. This was another one of those areas with lots of skinny little tunnels that you need to randomly go through until you pick the right one. I'm sure there's some rhyme or reason to these areas, probably relating to the X's and O's above the tunnels, but I couldn't figure it out. I just floundered around until I reached the exit and somehow ended up in the dinosaur's heart. This was another underwater area. Kind of, I guess. Technically, it's an underblood area. There were all these weird worm-looking things with lips like the Rolling Stones logo. and a little smiley faced white blood cells who try to eat you. The part was super short and simple though. I was in and out in like 30 seconds and off to the next area. This one's called... No, wait. No, they did not. They did not. I think the dinosaur might be a little lonely, if you catch my drift. So in this area, aptly named Blue Balls, we fight the second boss, named Bacti, who I guess is some sort of bacterial creature and not, in fact, one of the dinosaur's balls. Bacti has a fabulous moustache. I could not figure out this boss fight for the life of me, and being an underwater level made it so much worse. Bacti has these 4 flashing blue balls around him and 4 spiky things. I could bonk the blue balls and it kinda seemed like it was hurting him, but I did it for what felt like ages and nothing was happening. So it was tough to tell if it was working. Plus, I was taking a ton of damage by not swimming out of the way of the spikes in time. Eventually, I bonked one of the balls and it turned yellow. I couldn't tell why though, it seemed random. I managed to get 3 to turn yellow while growing increasingly annoyed because I knew I was going to suffer my first death any second now. Turns out if you die in a boss fight, you immediately come back to life with 3 hearts, and at the same point of the boss fight, no progression was lost, which is very lucky. I got all the balls to turn yellow, and at the time, I thought maybe you need to hit them when they flash white just to get them to change colour, but after watching this back and watching another playthrough on YouTube, I think you just need to hit them a bunch of times. There's actually nothing special about the fight at all. After a lot more struggling, the balls turned red. And then I died, yet again. I managed to hit the last yellow one and turn it red when I was down to my last half heart, yet again. And then all the balls flew off and Bacti exploded in a very dramatic fashion. Stage 2 cleared. Somehow, defeating Bacti caused the dinosaur to sneeze bonk out with such incredible force that you get shot off into space. The first area of stage 3 is called Lunar Towers. You start on the moon and floating around with these god-awful moon physics again. It's really hard to control. I aimlessly floated around for a while just trying to avoid the spikes and failing terribly. Eventually though, I did make my way to a cave and I entered the next area, Subterranean Trap. This cave is full of the creepiest dudes. I don't even know what they're meant to be. They crawl around on all fours and there's just something about them that seems, I don't know, almost inappropriate for children. They're just creepy. I can't explain it. After taking out all those creeps and getting to the exit, I was on to the next area, the Rage Cave. This was one of the more memorable areas in the game for me. There are these signs everywhere that just say rage, and I was very confused. I couldn't figure out where to go. There seemed to be no way up, until I randomly pushed a button and then the word rage shot out a bonk. I was more than a bit surprised by this. Even so, I was still a bit confused. I tried the button again and it just wasn't working. Turns out, if you try to use the rage while jumping, it doesn't work. I was trying to do that to get a bit of extra height, but yeah, not allowed. I came across a pool of lava and remembered earlier in the game that I jumped into the lava and not been hurt. I could swim in lava in this game, obviously, so I leapt in without hesitation. Nah, screw the rules. Apparently, this lava hurts you. I swear this game just makes up the rules as it goes along. There were so many minigame flowers in this cave. It was ridiculous. I kept accidentally grabbing them. I didn't want to. It was just distracting, but somehow I just kept grabbing them. I think I did 4 minigames in this one little area alone. I journeyed to the top of the Rage Cave and I made my exit to the Moon Ruins. This area was full of tall pillars covered in hieroglyphs and floating bounce flowers that you needed to utilize to get over the pillars. I didn't really spend much time out here, I just rushed through on my way to the Crabless Lake. In this cave, I immediately made a liar of the developers by getting squished and turning into a crab. There were some big waterfalls and a large lake. By the waterfalls, there was a sign stating no crabs can climb. So I journeyed on through a maze in the lake, and I eventually found a candy to turn myself back into regular Bonk, who of course can climb waterfalls. So I climbed my way up and out of the cave and into the Lunar Pyramid. This area had some really cool theming, I love it. The Lunar Pyramid has these long impassable spiked floors, but luckily for Bonk, there are boulders that roll back and forth along the spikes. So I pretty quickly figured out that you could just jump onto the boulders and ride them across the spikes. About halfway through the area, I came across this little cutie. I couldn't figure him out. Clearly he wasn't an enemy, he didn't hurt me. I couldn't hurt him either. So eventually I just walked off, but he floated after me. Weird. And just like that, he was gone again. Bye. He floated through the wall and disappeared forever. There were 2 boulders blocking the exit. Instead of figuring out the puzzle and the timing to get through unharmed, I just tanked the damage and ran through to the exit. I don't think that's what the devs had in mind, but whatever. So, I lied. Green guy wasn't gone forever. He came back in the next area only to steal half of my smileys. That bastard! I just called him cute. This area is called the Flower Maze. Here you've got to pick up bounce flowers and move them around to reach new areas. A bit of a puzzle room. It stumped me for a while before I remembered that you can spam the bonk button to float in the air. Once I realised that, it was all too easy to get through the rest of the room and onto the boss room. The boss room here is called Sensitive Ears. Another hint to how to defeat the boss, I guess. This time we're up against Harry, a pink bunny dressed in some sort of traditional looking Japanese robe and flying a UFO. There's also these adorable little bunnies in the background that are cheering her on. Aww. In this fight, there's 2 platforms on either side of the area that move up and down, and Harry floats around the middle. She has a paper fan that she uses to throw bits of paper at you, and for some reason that hurts. I tried to just race through this fight and tank the damage, which, in hindsight, was a really bad idea. For some reason, when Harry damages you enough to lose a heart, you actually lose the heart container too, not just the health. So by the end of the fight, I was down to 2 heart containers, which obviously would come back to bite me later. After the fight, Harry floats away while exploding and drops this blue candy that makes Bonk giant, and this leads us to Act 4, Super Big Bonk in Space. Another great name. But that would have to wait for another day. This is where I ended the first stream of playing Super Bonk. Stream 2 started with us floating through space with a goal of finding a comet. Now lucky for me, there were some crystal hearts in space. These increase the number of heart containers you have, as I may have mentioned earlier, and since I was down to only 2, this was very much needed. I floated around space for a bit, taking in the view. Oh hey look, my favourite planet, Pluto. That's right, my boy Pluto's not a planet anymore. Sorry buddy. Well, now that I'm nice and depressed, let's enter the comet, which looks oddly familiar. Now inside the Death Comet, I'm noticing the strange choice of enemies. We're still seeing a lot of dinosaurs, which we saw in the prehistoric level. I guess sometimes game devs back in these days had to reuse assets, which didn't always make sense just to save space on the cartridge. This area had so many hidden blocks, it was like every second jump I'd hit my head and another one would appear. I fumbled my way around until I reached the exit and moved on to the anti-gravity room. Ugh, another floating level. These suck, and now there are so many spikes it's really hard to avoid the damage. Luckily, there are a fair few hearts around to keep me going though. Onto the engine room now. This place is full of giant gears and treadmill floors. Honestly, not a lot to say about this room though. You climb some poles, run on some moving floors, dodge some enemies, and then bada bing bada boom, you're out of there. The voice room was up next, and the first thing I noticed was another rage sign. Was the voice that they were referring to the voice of rage? I think so. I found a new power up in this area too, a little flower petal that you could collect that gives you a big freaky looking flower on your head and it lets you float around freely. This kind of removed the need to use the rage to climb the area and I just floated my way to the exit. So the next area happened to be the boss fight already. This act was extremely short. This area was called Showy Glasses and our boss this time was Helly Hoovy, my favourite of the bosses by far. Not for the gameplay so much as the character design. I mean, look at him. He's a friggin' mammoth vacuum cleaner helicopter hybrid thing. How creative. In this fight, Helly floats around and occasionally turns on his hoover to damage you. He also shoots out these snowballs that turn into these cute little snowmen who chase you around. They do try to hurt you though, so they're not that cute. You can take them out pretty easily with a couple of bonks though. Luckily, right before I entered this room, I ate a giant candy, which made this fight very trivial. You just need to jump and bonk him in the eyes, which is a fairly small target, but once you get the hang of it, it's not too tough. I kept jumping at him while he was hoovering, and he would swap from aiming at the floor to up at me, and somehow I never noticed that you just can't jump at him while he uses this attack. But regardless, I tanked all the damage and quickly finished him off. So the comet explodes and Bonk gets shot out at light speed and transforms into a crab somehow. This game is weird. The first level of Act 5 is this horizontal shooter, where you're a crab and you're shooting these spinning smiley coins. When you shoot them, they reveal a positive or a negative prize. You can get points, smileys, hearts, or even crystal hearts. But you can also get the negative version of any of these, taking away ones you've already got. This just seemed like some quick little fun before going back to the standard levels. Finishing the weird crab level took us to the Twilight Jungle. This area seems very similar to one of the earlier prehistoric levels, just with the difficulty ramped up significantly. There are so many enemies everywhere and heaps of trees you need to swing from. If you fall into a body of water below, it's filled with these weird creatures who make a beeline right for you. But I got through this area and on to the next area, Memory Cave. I would quickly grow to hate Memory Cave. There were some caves with numbers above them and some waterfalls to help with navigation. I accidentally entered cave number 2. It's a freaking boss rush. Why? Nobody likes boss rushes. At least this time I know what I'm doing, right? Well, I still managed to die against old mate Blue Balls once before I managed to take him out. Luckily though, I had 6 lives. I should be alright. Next up, door number 1. A quick fight against Moonbeak. He was easy. I barely got hit. In the middle of Memory Cave, I noticed some crystal hearts, so I topped up my heart containers and grabbed a big heart to refill my health. I headed into door number 3. Time for a rematch with Hairy. I was taking a lot of damage during this fight, and I noticed I was losing heart containers at a rapid rate. This is when I realized that any of those papers, if they reach the floor, they cause you damage too, so even if you dodge them all, if you don't destroy them, you still get hurt. And you lose heart containers if enough reach the floor. This is going to make things really hard. Near the end of the fight, I had stopped every piece of paper, but Harry was flailing her fan around and I just lost another heart container. I have no idea what's going on. I can't wrap my head around the mechanics. Regardless, I beat Harry, but now I only had one heart container left for the rest of the fights. This was going to be a problem. On to room 4 and a rematch with Helly Hoovy. Unfortunately for me, this time I was Tiny Bonk. I bounced off an angry snowman and managed to get onto Helly's head. I damaged him 3 times by bouncing off and floating back to his head before I mistimed my float and I fell back to the floor. Now I only had half a heart left though. I died to a pylon by some of the snowmen, but I managed to quickly take them out while I still had some iframes from coming back to life. Turns out Helly's Hoover attack does a full heart of damage, so I immediately died again. Then I managed to get a couple of hits in before dying yet again to a snowman, down to 3 lives now. After this I managed to get back on top and take him out though. 3 lives left and I've beaten all 4 previous bosses. So what's next? There was only one room left. Behind the waterfall was a room with a question mark above the entrance. So in I went. This area was called Smiley Navel. It was a single screen with bounce flowers on either side of the screen. While I was wondering what I might need to do in here, our next opponent came flying in from the background. This here is the Crusher. This one seemed a little less obvious on what needed to be done. I tried jumping on his head, that did nothing. And then he hit me with his club. How rude. After he hit me, he zoomed off the screen again. Once he came back, I tried to hurt him again by bonking on his head or his tail. Neither did anything. I lost a couple more lives in the process. Doing this with 1 heart container was going to be near impossible, it seemed. When he came back from one of his little zoomies, his little devil face on his stomach started spinning. I did a standing bonk and finally managed to damage him. This really upset him though, and he shot a big green beam at me with the word strike in the middle of it. Of course, I died yet again. But at least now I knew what to do. Shame I was down to my last life. I tried to go in for another attack, but the range of a standing bonk is so incredibly short, I missed, and then tried to move forward again, but the movement in this game's a bit slippery, so instead of moving just a tiny bit forward, I just ran right into him and died. Game over. I chose to continue at the game over screen, obviously, not knowing where the game would bring me back to. Turns out, it takes you to the start of the act, so here I was, a crab in space yet again. This time I only started out with 2 lives though. Uh-oh. At this point in the script, I feel like I've waffled on longer than I was planning to, and I don't want to bore you with a play-by-play of me trying and failing the boss rush a million times, so I'll just give you the highlights. Attempt number 2. I beat Moonbeak without dying, but left myself with only half a heart. I filled my health and started the Bacti fight, although I accidentally did it while tiny as I fell into the doorway. I really struggled here. I died once and then beat Bacti with half a heart yet again. I just find this fight really tough. His hitbox feels a little bit jank and I really suck at the swimming. Back in Memory Cave, I tried to fill my heart with the big red heart but not collect the crystal heart so I could refill my health bar later after fighting Harry. But unfortunately there's one enemy in Memory Cave and he managed to take me out before I could refill my health. Now I'm down to 1 life. Boss fight 3 up next, I started with full health and 1 life left. Yeah, well 2 technically since you can still play with 0 lives. I figured out a tactic to cheese the Harry fight. Flail wildly and try hard to stay on top of her head. I managed to take her out in about 10 seconds, only losing a couple of hearts. Onto Helly Hoovy. I tried my best to cheese this fight as well, but he's tricky to stay on top of. He moves so much, and I just struggled to jump up high enough to even damage his head. In the end, I game overed again against old mate Helly. Back to the crab level. 3rd time's the charm. I eventually figured out you do more damage as Giant Bonk, and it's so much easier to jump high enough to reach the enemy's heads. I made it back to the Crusher this time without losing any lives. Unfortunately, to reach the door he resides behind, you need to be regular size Bonk, so no big boy advantage. I still really struggled with this fight. I thought I knew what I was doing, but it just seemed to be random when I could actually damage him. I got knocked around a bunch and I lost 2 lives before starting to even feel remotely confident. Warning, if you go back and watch this stream, there is a lot of swearing. I was getting pretty damn frustrated by this point. This guy just had so much health. I just kept hitting him and hitting him. I just kept saying, surely this is almost done, and yet it just kept going. Finally, after what seemed like forever, we destroyed the Crusher. We fell into little pieces and I was so happy. Silly me, I thought this might be the final boss. I was wrong, obviously. We got a shortcut scene of King Drool, shocked that Bonk had made his way all the way back, saying that it looks like it's time for the last resort, before we started Act 6, the final battle on Earth. Now, we had to make our way up to Drool's Tower, a pretty run-of-the-mill vertical level. It's another prehistoric setting with a ton of enemies and spikes. At one point, I got smushed into a crab and I couldn't do anything until I reverted back to Bonk. I sat around for a while thinking it was a time-based thing, but after waiting for ages, I decided to go get a candy instead, as I don't think it is actually a time-based transformation, so scratch that when I said that earlier. I journeyed higher and higher and higher. Occasionally I fell back down though and had to trek back a fair way, but eventually I did it. I made it to the exit. The next area was called Invisible Bonk. Now, at this point, I hadn't realised area names are sometimes hints, and I also hadn't figured out that different types of transformations have different abilities. Hell, I still hadn't realised you can only rage as Tiny Bonk. What can I say? Sometimes I'm just a bit dumb. Now looking back, clearly I was meant to transform into Dinosaur Bonk so I could turn invisible and safely walk across the spikes. But is that what I did? No. No, it is not. I grabbed a piece of meat, and it gave me a temporary invulnerability. I ran across the spikes really quickly, having a good time, but then I made it to the safe zone where I transformed into Dino Bonk. Instead of using my invisibility like I should have, I just ran through and tanked all the damage. This happened more than once in this area too, so I took a lot of unnecessary damage. Oh well, you live and you learn. The next area was called the Final Trap. You use your teeth to climb the wall, jumping from side to side, dodging the spikes. Instead of doing this though, I just took a ton of damage. Somehow I still made it to the final room though. This room was just called Secret. I walked in and the wall behind me slid up, sealing me in. There was nothing in this room but some windows to look out of. Outside, I saw King Drool flying around and then suddenly he knocked the whole tower over, knocking Bonk all the way to the floor again. All that climbing for nothing. How rude. Immediately, 2 giant robot arms reached out from either side of the screen and killed me since I only had 1 heart left at this point. Ah well, still 2 lives left. Should be right. I flowered around trying to figure out what to do, taking a buttload of damage and dying yet again. After 20 seconds or so, a giant blue candy fell from the sky though, so I collected it and became Ultra Giant Bonk. The way they did this was actually really cool though. Instead of Bonk's sprite getting bigger, everything else shrank down. So it still had the same effect on you, making you look much larger, but you still take up the same amount of screen space. So now out came King Drool in a flying vehicle with a big pair of metal jaws on the front. He dropped some cannonballs onto me and started dive bombing me, trying to eat me with the metal jaws. When he gets low enough, you can jump over him and bonk him. I managed to damage him enough to finally get to the next phase. Now his vehicle transforms into the shape of his head and it sporadically runs around trying to eat you. The movement is so random and hard to judge. I was taking heaps of damage here. His hitbox is also really small, so I struggled to damage him. It's funny to watch back now because it was so chaotic, but at the time I was just so annoyed. Somehow though, I got insanely lucky and I hit him one last time to finish the fight when I had no lives left and 1/4 of a heart. 1 hit from him and I would have had to start the entire stage again, back to the crab level. So after this last hit, yet another giant candy appears and Bonk gets even bigger again. This was such a satisfying ending. You chase him down and you jump on the machine to explode it. King Drool flies out and then he gets stuck in his own trap, then gets sent back to an alternate timeline. And that's it. Super Bonk was completed in a time of 2 hours and 44 minutes. Roll credits. Oh, what a success. That was frustrating as shit, but I don't care because I enjoyed that. For the most part, that was one of those games that you beat and you're just like, fuck yeah, I did it. I feel like I accomplished something beating this game. Even though it started out really easy, by the end it actually got quite hard. So, Super Bonk worth playing today? Absolutely. There is one caveat though. Don't go into this expecting the polish of like a Mario or a Donkey Kong game, because this one's a bit rough around the edges, but I think it's absolute absurdity more than makes up for it, so give it a go. For the gameplay, I rate Super Bonk a 6 out of 10. It's a fun game, but it's definitely lacking a little bit of polish that holds it back from being a great game. I love platformers, as I've said so many times before, but I don't really love the exploration style platformers like this game as much, usually. I find when I play these games I kind of fly through the levels just racing for the exit, not really taking in the full experience like you're meant to, especially when the collectibles are mostly useless, just there to get some arbitrary points or the like. However, the overall experience of this game makes up for what I perceive as its shortcomings. I'm not sure if you can really lump in the themes and the general vibe into the gameplay category, but this is my review, so I am. And that's why this game gets a 6 in the gameplay. The music gets a 5. I had to go back and listen to the music before I could even decide on a rating, even though I'd just finished watching almost 3 hours of gameplay. It's just very forgettable. It's extremely boppy and upbeat. Very fast paced for a lot of the game, but its short loops lead to quickly becoming background noise. Which of course it is, but I mean, it just kind of tuned it out eventually. Listening back, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember these songs, they're kind of cool, but they just don't stick with me. It's just missing that wow factor. It's not a soundtrack that I'd put on in the background while I'm working, but it's not bad either. So it only makes sense to just give it a complete middle of the road, a 5. The graphics get a 7.5 out of 10. I am kinda torn on the graphics. I think about them and I say to myself, yeah, they're fine. But then I look back at the footage and I'm like, man, these are great. The character sprites are so big and expressive. Everyone has heaps of personality. The faces Bonk make are hilarious. Whether it's the furious eyebrows of Fester Bonk or the sheer insanity of Giant Kronk Bonk. Everything he does is funny. Some of the backgrounds, on the other hand, can be really boring. The caves are bland, and a lot of the areas have just one solid colour background. But then there's areas like the city near the start of the game with sprawling parallax backgrounds filled with unique skyscrapers and treetops that just look amazing. It almost seems like they ran out of time to really polish up the background art in some areas, considering how vastly different some of the areas are from others in regards to the quality of the art. The character art really brings this game up a level though. The zany characters and the many faces of Bonk really make this game what it is, a unique work of art. Overall, I give Super Bonk a 7 out of 10. What more can I say about the game that hasn't already been said? It's a wild ride from start to finish, and I found myself saying, what the fuck, so many times throughout my playthrough, in the best kind of way. The biggest letdown though is the controls. They're just a little bit too floaty and imprecise for my tastes. I'm sure with more practice this wouldn't bother me, but yeah, there was a bit of a learning curve on how to get used to the controls for Bonk. I highly recommend everyone try this game at least once. It's a very fun, unique experience that's good for a laugh. I think this might be one game from this challenge that I actually go back to and play in future. Now that I understand more about the ins and outs of the games, I think a second playthrough might even be more enjoyable than the first. Thanks so much for making it through to the end of the video. I really appreciate it. If you liked it, like the video, you know how it is. Gotta ask, apparently. So, some of you more keen-eyed viewers may have noticed I dropped off the face of the earth for 9-10 months, I guess. I was stuck in a Where's Wally puzzle, my bad. Watch the last video if you don't understand. I just quickly want to say, thank you to everyone who stuck around and came back, watched the videos once I started uploading again, started streaming and came to the streams, all of that. Really appreciate it. Good to know people actually care, miss this series, you know. Enjoy it. So, thanks guys. Yeah, I don't intend to disappear for another 10 months, so should be a bit more scheduled. Well, I won't say scheduled, a bit more regular. But there's not going to be a schedule because that's kind of what made me drop off. I couldn't adhere to one, it was too hard, and I freaked out and just gave up. So, there'll be videos when there's videos. Alright, with all that nonsense out of the way, what game are we playing next? Next up, we've got Wild Guns. So the name Wild Guns meant nothing to me before I started streaming it, but now it's actually kind of a special game to me, funny enough. Yeah, so thanks to one of the viewers, brgfxa, in one of the streams I was asking for a short game, something I could beat pretty quickly to, you know, pad out the numbers because I was getting close to running out of games I'd beaten for videos, and he goes, yeah, Wild Guns, nice short one. He did not say easy though, so yeah, for some people, it's very short. For me, one of the longest games I've done so far in this challenge, so stick around for that madness. Not exactly sure when it'll be done, like halfway through the script I guess, so it'll be done when it's done. Stick around though. Bye.